evolution, technology, health, life. Most of us know these words, but the main subject from which they find their root is something very few people ever think about until now. Experts throughout this film will approach these issues from many perspectives and with very different objectives. Historically, this has always been the case. Lord Buckley, speaking of humanity, said, and I quote, "People are the true flowers of life, and it has been a most precious pleasure to have temporarily strolled in your garden," unquote. Yet Margaret Sanger, addressing the very same subject, described those who have, quote, "done absolutely nothing to advance the race one iota. Such human weeds clog up the path, drain up the energies and the resources of this little earth. We must clear the way for a better world. We must cultivate our garden," unquote. The language is similar, but the worldviews are completely different. Both have consequences, some positive, some negative. In the end, each one of us must determine what it is we believe and where those ideas take us. The answer to these questions affect not only our lives, but the lives of everyone who has, does, or ever will exist, whether they're flowers of life or human weeds.
These people look all right. The mailman, the farmer, the cop. They all look pretty much like the folks back home. Holding down jobs, raising families, enjoying life. They certainly look like the kind of people we can understand.
Or can we? A quiet, decent people who prepared 20 years to bring war into the world? A religious people who burn churches, imprison ministers, persecute the faithful? A kindly people who accept blood purges, pogroms, concentration camps? A gentle people who torture, starve, exterminate?
Germany was culturally Christian. We know, because of what happened, because of the Holocaust, that their Christianity could not have been very deep-rooted and very well thought out. That's obvious. But most Germans didn't have, they hadn't unpacked the Christian worldview, that somebody who has an IQ of 70 and who's drooling constantly has exactly equal value as Albert Einstein. In fact, it says that Mother Teresa has equal value as Adolf Hitler. Now again, it has nothing to do with what they do with their lives. We're talking about intrinsic value. And so if you believe that, it leads to certain kinds of policies. And if you don't believe that, it leads to, for example, eugenics.
Have you ever heard of eugenics? And if you have, can you define it?
Eugenics, no.
Is that epigenetics?
I don't think so.
No.
Eugenics.
No, I don't think so.
Nix, snacks, paddywhack. I don't know.
Well, people think of it as trying to create some kind of master race.
Eugenics? I've heard of it, but that's honestly, I don't have any idea what it is.
I don't know what that word means.
The term eugenics, probably a lot of people aren't very familiar with that. And so when we break it down, eu means good and genics means in birth. So it literally means good in birth. And the term was first coined actually by Francis Galton in 1883, who's considered the father of eugenics. And what's interesting is that Galton is actually the cousin of Charles Darwin.
Well, eugenics is fundamentally Darwinism applied to people. The goal of modern medicine is to eliminate natural selection. That's great. Who wants to see sick people? But that means that your genetic load, the amount of problems you have in the population gradually increases. Look at me. I wouldn't last long in the jungle. The first tiger would eat me, I wouldn't see you.
So when we talk about eugenics, there's essentially two forms of it. There's positive eugenics and there's negative eugenics. And positive eugenics deals with increasing the fit, increasing the desirable. So usually that was done through the promotion of the marriage of the well-born, okay? We wanted them to marry, and then we wanted them to have lots of children, okay? So that was the concept of it. And then negative eugenics is obviously the opposite of that. It's decreasing the unfit or the undesirables. And so that was done through birth control, through abortion, through sterilization, and then through segregation. So then you also had things like anti-immigration laws, and you had marriage restriction laws.
And in the 1920s and 30s in this country, in the United States of America, we had the same idea that we can perfect humanity.
But around the time of Margaret Sanger, and maybe a little bit before, you start seeing eugenics take on not a breeding mentality, but an elimination mentality where, okay, we're not just going to breed the better humans, but we're also going to try to extinguish the lesser humans.
Margaret Sanger, she's obviously the founder of Planned Parenthood, was very much a eugenicist. If you read her writings, if you listen to her presentations, it's very obvious that what she wanted to do was essentially to, what she said, cultivate our garden, meaning the human garden, and to get rid of the human weeds. She called them human weeds. And so that's what she sought to do.
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
She wanted segregation. She actually wanted sterilization more, because segregation, just segregating out the defectives, wasn't enough. She actually wanted them to be forcibly sterilized.
And this is where you get the idea that Margaret Sanger pushed of not only birth control and mandatory birth control for the unfit, but also sterilization, forced sterilization of certain kinds of human beings.
And obviously abortion and actual birth control, to try to prohibit what she called the defectives.
I wouldn't say that Margaret Sanger was the sole architect of this by any stretch of the imagination, but she was a key voice, and her organization becomes something that lasts long after her to propel the same philosophy. It's a terrible legacy that she left, but a legacy nonetheless.
In 1919, the Indiana legislature passed a bill that allowed for the building of one more facility, which was to be a farm colony for the feeble-minded. Indiana was the first state to approve the use of eugenics in 1909. This facility was the last of the mental health facilities built in Indiana. In March of 1920, 20 patients were sent down from the Fort Wayne school to the new Indiana Farm Colony for the Feeble-Minded here at Butlerville, Indiana. At that time, it was all dirt roads, it was all mud. They were brought down here, and they were called inmates at the time. They weren't even called patients, they weren't called anything but inmates. They were brought here to build buildings for patients that would be coming in the future. For many, many years, this was a facility to warehouse people society did not want. The list of things that people were put into institutions for in the 1920s and before was just a list of unbelievable reasons, varied reasons, from Mexican War excitement to trouble in love. Things that today are just absolutely mind-boggling that people were put in here for.
And what does that mean? It means somebody, scientists or government, taking control and saying, you cannot reproduce, we're going to sterilize you. We only need to think of Tuskegee and other places where, the people in power took the people out of power and did with them what they liked, where people who had low IQ were being sterilized against their will or without their knowledge, without their parents' knowledge. The government says, well, we know best. We're just going to do this because there's a larger goal. The goal is to perfect the race, to have a master race of brilliant, wonderful people.
What I would consider the black mark on all mental health issues in the United States is the use of eugenics. The use of eugenics was rampant. And as far as even in the first annual report that was put out here in 1920, the head doctor actually tried to make it so that people had to be sterilized before they could be brought to this facility. In total, over 8,000 patients went through the doors here in 85 years. 148 of those patients were sterilized. The use of eugenics. Now, I've looked at some of the records, not all of them. The records that I have looked at of patients that were sterilized, we still call it forced sterilization. But these patients this was the process they went through. They were told that they were going to a committee meeting. They were taken up to Indianapolis and set before a board. And they were told, if you will allow us to sterilize you, we'll set you free. Because the thought was that if they were a sexual deviant, sterilizing them would take care of that. The thought was, even if it didn't take care of it, they couldn't breed, so there would be no more deviants, as they were called. They would say yes. They would be sterilized, and they would be set free and released back to their families if the families wanted them.
So the question became, how do you decide who's unfit? I mean, who are the undesirables? Because we've been talking about that, but how do you actually decide that? And they had conferences to figure out classes of the unfits and the undesirables. But what was interesting was when you look at the terms that they used to describe them, they were very vague and very broad. So you have things like moron. You had moron scales. You had imbeciles. You had constitutionally weak, feeble-minded.
You have to remember there were only 3 levels of patient at the time: idiot, imbecile, and moron. And it wasn't just your IQ that depended on, it was how much work you could do, what kind of work. That really depended on where you were in that level. This is interesting to me. This is what's called a WASAR. It was actually a doctor could carry this around, and it's a mobile IQ test. They could literally carry this around and just give an IQ test to anybody at any time. And you had several things. They had to put a puzzle together. They had to figure out how to put these blocks together. I was told by a doctor I put them together wrong, so I'm sure that means something. But yeah, they had paperwork and everything.
Most of the eugenicists thought that approximately 10% of the American population were undesirable and that they needed to be gotten rid of, so to speak.
It's very easy to deceive a person and to begin saying, wouldn't life be better if those people, criminals, something's wrong with them? Wouldn't it be better if we sort of got rid of them somehow? Wouldn't it be better if we got rid of the lives even before they're born? Because what are the odds that that person being born into that kind of poverty could have a good life? They're probably going to become criminals. That's really how Margaret Sanger and the proponents of the eugenics movement in the United States in the early part of the 20th century, that's how they were thinking about this. And it was very racist. There's just no getting around that. It was extremely racist. They actually thought, just what the Nazis thought, that some races are superior to others.
You have to remember that at that time, things that we think of today as just children acting out, things that we think of as adults acting out, at that time was thought of as mental illness, things that you can't even comprehend locking a person away for. If you had somebody in your family that was an embarrassment because they were always acting out, or they were what they called slow, lock them away, forget about them.
And what happened, though, because there was so much research and so much work and so much money being put into this in the United States, was that Hitler and the Nazi regime was actually able to use that, what American eugenicists were producing, as a scientific rationale for their extermination of certain people groups like the Jewish people.
Hitler just took that social Darwinism, if you will, to its more radical end. But as far as how it transmitted from the United States to Germany, I don't even know that I would say that it necessarily had to do that. I think that Hitler and the thought leaders in Germany at the time were able to come to the same logical conclusions that Margaret Sanger and others in the United States were able to come to based on the prevailing philosophy of the world at the time, the spirit of the age, which of course was that Darwinian survival of the fittest philosophy.
We were using eugenics first. I have not studied in depth when the Nazis really started getting into eugenics, when they started the thought of eugenics. I do know that German scientists came over to study our methods. When you look at the methods that they used as far as trying to weed out what they called undesirables, very, very mirrored with what we were doing.
It was America, not Nazi Germany, who first applied Francis Galton's social Darwinism on its own people. In fact, eugenics became so popular in the United States, the entire world would follow its lead. The Nazis simply put into practice what American eugenics promoted, fulfilling its horrific yet logical conclusion.
Take a look at this poster. The top figure represents the total amount based on a 2003 study that is spent by taxpayers over the lifespan of somebody who is permanently disabled, mentally handicapped, cerebral palsy. When you take a look at this, what are your thoughts?
Worth it. I mean, some people, they can't live for themselves and they need this type of assistance. Everybody has the right to life.
I don't know. It looks creepy. It looks dark.
What I'd love to know is how this breaks down per person and what I have to pay, because I bet it's only pennies.
It automatically makes me think, okay, I'm spending my taxpayer dollars on keeping this person alive, which is very selfish of me, but very honest of me.
That's how you regard life. That's just, it's just really sad to me.
I think that you have a moral duty to do whatever is necessary to take care of the weak and the needy in the culture.
A young German couple has come to register the birth of their son. Those documents are birth certificates, all the way back to their great-grandparents, proving, of course, that they are pure Aryan. This is their hereditary passport, with space for 12 future children. A subtle hint. Hans became sick. His mother is praying that her son get well. She knows that the unfit are taken away by the state and are never heard of again.
In Nazi Germany, they used the phrase, it's a chilling phrase, they used the phrase useless eaters, meaning consumers. They were consuming, but they weren't contributing. And so it's a utilitarian philosophy, because here they have a situation where the war is coming and they have limited resources. They want to win the war. So they're supporting all of these people, handicapped people in all these institutions. It's costing them a lot of money. Hitler's worldview, and the worldview of many Germans at the time, was utilitarian. They said, look, those people in those institutions are doing nothing for the Third Reich. We need people who can do good things, and if we are supporting somebody in an institution who's doing nothing, that means less bullets for your son who is fighting as a hero of the Reich. Is that right? No, it's not right. So parents of this defective person, this handicapped person, you understand that it is an absolutely normal thing for us to ask you to make the sacrifice of allowing your child to be killed humanely and disposed of for the greater good. And the Nazis went to great lengths to do this. I mean, they made propaganda films of drooling mental defectives that anybody looking at it would have a visceral reaction and say, oh, how repulsive. Obviously, that person would be better off dead.
We say that Hitler and Nazi Germany are the black sheep of the eugenics movement, that they gave it a black eye and that they embarrassed the movement. And all of that is all well and good. But I guess I would ask the question, how is exterminating the Jewish race any more horrific, which it is horrific, but how is it any more horrific than exterminating people that we regard as imbeciles in the United States by not letting them breed or sterilizing them? It's the same principle. You are eliminating human beings for the same purpose of establishing a master race. So I guess that's one of the things that confuses me the most about leftist progressives who will undoubtedly throw Hitler under the bus and say what a horrible person he was, but then turn around and praise someone who had a virtually identical worldview and accomplished virtually the same things as far as exterminating human beings just at an earlier stage.
The interesting side of this poster is it was a poster used by the Nazi regime to justify the eradication of those deemed unworthy by the state, the human weeds.
That's deep.
You're kidding. Really?
I don't know. That just stuns me right there.
It kind of just adds more to the way that you look at like the Nazis and how they like affected the whole world and how they just made human life seem like it was nothing.
If this was passed out in society today, it would get me thinking, and it would give me a perspective of the mentally ill in a way that I probably wouldn't question had this not been shown to me, which is very frightening for me.
It kind of changes the way you think about it now.
Any of us could be in this situation as well, and being on that side of it, how would you feel knowing that there's a price on your life and that people want to pull you as a weed?
You got me thinking. Thank you guys.
Though Nazism was a prevailing view of human life in Germany, it wasn't the only view. Bielefeld Bethel, also called Bolesving Foundation Bethel, was a home founded in 1867 for people with epilepsy. Quickly, it became the largest Christian care center throughout Europe for children and adults with various disabilities. Two diametric worldviews were at war in Germany regarding the value of human life.
This was absolutely antithetical to the Nazi death centers where they were killing everyone. This was a place very radically and explicitly Christian where they said all life is worthy and we will do whatever it takes to show love and to care for these handicapped people. But it stood in such dramatically sharp contrast to the way the Nazis were framing things, because the Nazis were demanding that places like that and hospitals around Germany that cared for handicapped people should turn over those people to be killed.
Determined not to let history repeat itself, most people developed an instinctive revulsion to all ideas that could appear to have any kind of association with Nazi ideology. In particular, the eugenics movement as a whole, in all of its forms, became discredited because of the terrible crimes that had been committed in its name.
Yet even with Nazi Germany's defeat, the seeds of eugenic ideology continued to be sown in various ways. Though eugenics' reputation was badly damaged, the desire for a better world with an advanced human race only grew stronger. As societies became more globally conscious and concerned for the environment, a new fear arose that mankind was quickly outgrowing its habitat. The old eugenic goal for a higher quality of life is the root of modern-day population control, known as sustainable development.
I think a lot of people think that eugenics is just a thing of the past, that it's a historical event. And while it is a historical event, it's still very much alive and well today. In the 1940s, it started to really fall out of style because it was associated with the Nazis and people didn't want anything to do with them.
A lot of people who've framed the eugenics issue around this idea of population control. And you see this now bleeding into our society because you start saying, well, okay, there are too many human beings for the planet. And you hear this over and over, so people kind of buy into it. Then you say, oh, well, we've got to have fewer people because we're a drain on the globe. So now it's not Germany, right? It's the globe, the planet. The planet takes precedence over you. So life is now not only judged according to whether it's worthy of living, but it's almost right out of the gate looked at as a bad thing. Like every life is kind of a drain on the planet because there's so many of us now. So the fewer lives, the better.
In 2011, the human race exceeded 7 billion people. Is there an overpopulation problem? And if so, what should be done?
I do believe there's an overpopulation problem, and I think the universe is kind of helping weed that problem out.
I don't know. Overpopulation isn't really deep. I don't think it's an issue.
I think it's a problem.
If we're not right now, we're going to.
I feel like we're about at capacity in certain areas.
It's a problem because it's a lot of people, but we don't have like resources for a lot of people.
It's a matter of distributing resources. I think we've got plenty of resources, but it's a matter of getting them where they need to be.
I don't think overpopulation. We have so much unused land all over the world. We'll be all right.
It may be overpopulated in China and all those places, but if they expand out, I mean, there's so much space in the world.
I don't know. There's a lot of desert out there.
And plus we have Mars to go out to, if needed.
Let's talk about globally. Globally.
Globally.
7 billion is a lot of people.
London was the first city over 1 million population since Rome fell. But all through the 19th century, this massive amount of new wealth generated by stored fossil fuels and new communications allowed us to reproduce ourselves in numbers we never did before. And we ended up in big, dense urban populations of cities of 1 million or more.
The big jump in population occurred simultaneous with the Industrial Revolution. We're talking about 1750 to 1850.
In the 20th century, the second industrial revolution allowed us to somewhat disperse those populations because of the automobile and suburban build-out. So we ended up with a suburbanization of society. And again, more and more human beings added to the rosters.
So if you look at the curve, the population curve, it looks like this until you come to the Industrial Revolution, and it goes psh, like that.
So these two industrial revolutions allowed us to go from very small population, a species that was living well within the means of the biocapacity of the Earth, to a massive, massive, dramatic change in population in which we began to overwhelm the biocapacity of the planet we live in.
See, at that levels, we'll have 8 billion people in 13 years. And who knows how many, 10 billion by the end of the century? So we're talking about reality here. And if we don't do something, I think we face a future that we don't want, that's unfair.
But the big problem, though, is that what we have now is we have this vibrant ecology, this wonderful planet. And we are the invasive species from hell.
Right now, the human population is really outstripping the biocapacity of this Earth. In fact, the models show that if everyone on the planet were to have the same lifestyle and use the same amount of resources as the average American, we'd need 4 to 5 Earths right now to sustain everyone else if they lived the way the average American does. We are destroying the ecosystem. We really are weeds in this sense.
There are 4 conditions which are necessary for us as a species if we were some sort of forest ranger managing ourselves on a rational basis. You have to have a source of resources, and as I said, it has to be renewable. You have to have a clean environment. You have to have a population which does not exceed the carrying capacity, the long-term carrying capacity of the planet. And you need a healthy, intelligent population.
With 7 billion people on the planet, we're living on the equivalent of 1.5 Earths, which means that we are gobbling up more of the Earth's capacity than we can recycle and replenish. So we're already really in deep trouble. Then if you compound that with real-time climate change, which is changing the water cycle, undermining our ecosystems, and affecting the ability of humans and other creatures to survive on Earth, this is a crisis of monumental proportions. It's not just a crisis of the economy. It's not just a crisis of our population. This is a crisis of life on this planet.
Population control is a very key issue that needs to be enforced.
They should have the right to have as many kids as they want, honestly.
I can't imagine telling someone they can't have as many kids as they want, if they can take care of them, but I guess that's not for me to judge, so.
I believe that the United States of America should have a 2-child per couple policy.
What happens to the third? Accidents happen all the time. I was one.
I haven't really thought about it too much, but I would say off the top of my head that limiting the number of children seems like a bad idea.
One of the interesting things about population is the Chinese put the one-child policy into place and were pretty forceful about making it happen. And when they put the one-child policy into place, the population of China was less than 1 billion. Now it's about 1.3 billion. So if you had a one-child policy, how on earth can the population have grown enormously like that? And the answer is that when you first put it into place, life expectancy in China was about 35 years. Now life expectancy has gone up to something like 70 years. Now that's going to happen all over the developing world. You're going to get the developing world living much longer lives, and that means you're going to have a much higher population.
I think it's a mistake to assume that biologism is bad because it has links to a dark past. Rather, one should attack stupid ideas because they're immoral and stupid in the present.
Eugenics was the ideology of Holocaust. Now, it's true, Hitler did believe in eugenics. Hitler was also a vegetarian, and he believed in the multiplication table.
I think the reason eugenics is bad is that a lot of it was bad based on bad science. They actually didn't understand what they were aiming for. And it was also centralized. So that meant if the decision was wrong, everybody had to follow a bad decision or bad law. And the third part was, of course, well, it was coercive. It was not up to people to decide what we did. So the result was bad science, central power and coercion led to horrific abuses.
Why should it be controversial to say that healthy, intelligent children should be our goal rather than sick, unintelligent children? How can this be controversial?
So I think the word eugenics raises a lot of strong emotions. But basically it's about wanting to have the best possible life for one's children, as long as it's on the personal level. When it's a government or some organization trying to optimize society for an end, then you breach a lot of ethical principles.
Talking about reducing population, you must, I think, only talk about that in using very ethical methods. There's one ethical method which is extremely powerful indeed, and that is that you take women who have, women in many countries have been having 7 babies, and as soon as you teach them to read, the number of children, the fertility rate drops. Go beyond that and put them in a position where they can do interesting work, and it drops. Go beyond that and take them into a world where they can do the same work as men, and some women can move into jobs which are very high-powered jobs. They become top money managers and so on. And then they get married late. They often don't have any children at all. So there are lots of ways in which we can stop population growing rapidly, which are extremely beneficial for the human beings involved, and that's what we ought to be looking for.
So we have 2 problems. One is that all of us that are living way beyond the biocapacity of the Earth, we are a population problem because of the amount of energy and resources we're using, even though we have small families. But then again, we still have the bottom 40% of the human population. They have a smaller ecological footprint. They're not using as much of the biocapacity, but they are increasing their numbers dramatically.
I think we're far beyond the long-term carrying capacity of the planet. We can support all these people right now. We're doing... but once we've exhausted our resources, what are we going to do then?
I think the idea of liberal eugenics, actually, morally speaking, is not too problematic.
You ought to be given the right, or ought to have the right, to enhance yourself and live longer as a human type of right. Likewise, if you want to remain a biological animal with a limited lifespan as a human, that is your right, and you ought never to be coerced to live longer or enhance.
We'll be able to create something essential for the humanity, and it may sound pathetic, but to change the world at least a little bit.
Population reduction, however, isn't the end goal of modern eugenics. From its inception, the purpose of eugenics was to assist natural selection in creating an advanced phase of human development. Eugenics isn't limited to only weeding out the unfit. It's equally dedicated to fertilizing those who are better fit. Mankind must be upgraded. Therefore, the latest push in eugenics combines evolutionism with technology and what has become known as transhumanism.
We are going to see much bigger revolutions in the future than we've seen thus far. Once we adopt a new architecture modeled after the biological brain, we're going to have, it'll be a new, what's called transhumanism.
We are aimed to create the opportunity for everybody to continue his or her development and live in an evolution. And basically, we are trying to create the spirit on our planet, which will allow everybody to become perfect.
Transhumanism is generally interested in using rational methods to improve the human condition. And that, of course, includes avoiding having genetic diseases, and it would be good to have healthy genes or even genes that enhance your function. So transhumanists has historically been interested in this and, of course, butted head with people who think that any even mention of a genetic basis for important human traits is racist and evil.
Transhumanism you can think of as, in some ways, an inheritor of the Enlightenment goals of fundamental progress in the human condition. And that's why it's called transhumanism. But it's taking it a step beyond the humanist goals of generally improving the human condition through science and technology and goodwill, and we can actually change the human condition itself. We can use science and technology to understand the causes of aging, and we can learn to eliminate those causes.
Down the road, we're going to start enhancing our bodies with prosthetic parts. And we're also going to be looking inside the body using nanomedicine, stem cells, regenerative media. We're going to be utilizing aspects of genetic engineering to hopefully reverse aging.
Many transhumanists have argued that, yeah, we should have a right to alter our bodies and our brain chemistry. Which means that you have to struggle against both the current system of medical ethics and some drug laws, but also a general view that maybe doctors know best. You shouldn't be allowed to mess too much with your biology. That's somebody else's domain, which I think is utterly absurd, because if I'm not allowed to mess with my body, well, wait a minute, what freedom do I have?
I think we should start creating the demand for those technologies in order to be able to change our bodies, to get more capable bodies, to get rid of sicknesses, diseases, death, and in order to overcome our biological nature and to overcome our limitations of biology.
And the whole issue of life extension is to extend our being. Not just to have a life in another environment as another agent or entity, but to extend our own personhood.
So really transhumanism is about taking control of our own evolution and deciding how long we want to live, how smart we want to be, how well modulated our emotions should be. It's really about turning over the choices to us.
We're driving our future. It's a very cybernetic or second-order cybernetic approach that I find very linked into the transhumanist scope, that if we are indeed steering our future, then we need to be responsible for it.
There's a larger goal. The goal is to perfect the race, to have a master race of brilliant, wonderful people. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is it's saying that the value of a human being is in that person's IQ, in that person's ability to do stuff. It's a very utilitarian, materialistic view of a human being.
I personally believe this is something extremely negative. Up till now, medicine was always viewed as helping sick people become well again. But that line has been transgressed to the area of enhancing a perfectly healthy human being. And this means merging a human being with some kind of machinery, be it a computer or be it some type of device which has been created by nanomedicine or nanotechnology.
It inevitably will affect everyone, because anyone who gets sick, and most of us will, anyone who gets old will at some point cease to be as productive as they once were.
And if the same motivation behind the current transhumanist movement is what the eugenics originally wanted to achieve, it is the vision of killing off the better part of humanity.
When you have the government in charge of your health care and the government only has limited resources to care for you, then there's no question that health care is going to be rationed. And obviously, they're only going to want to pay for the care of those that will be being able to economically contribute to our society, to the gross national product.
And who's to say, if you buy into that worldview, who's to say that any one of us won't be on the receiving end from some doctor or team of doctors who will say, look, funds are kind of tight. We're going to have to, you need to check out a little earlier. And we don't mean from the hospital. We mean from this realm. How can you argue with it? Once you buy into this idea, you realize that that's inevitably where it goes.
Statistics say that 92% of women who have a definitive diagnosis of Down syndrome would choose to abort their baby. 92%. So a lot of people, I think, don't see those things as eugenics. They don't think about that. They don't use that term, but it is eugenics. There is no question. You're getting rid of people who you deem as being less desirable and only allowing those that are well born, so to speak, to be born.
When he was in the British Parliament, William Wilberforce, the man that everyone understands as bringing an end to the slave trade in England almost single-handedly, he gets all of these parliamentarians on one of Her Majesty's ships, and they're told that they're going to go out for a dinner cruise. And they've got their wives with them, and the captain of the ship pulls the ship up right next to a slave ship that's used to transport slaves. And the stench is simply overwhelming. And the parliamentarians are getting sick. They're physically ill at the smell of this. Some of them are covering their mouths with handkerchiefs and all sorts of things. And Wilberforce stands up in front of all of them and says, "Stop it. Pull that away from your mouths. Breathe it in, smell it in. That is the stench of slavery that you are allowing in your civilization." So I think what we need now more than ever is a Wilberforce moment where we do something unique to illustrate to a population, this is the reality of what we're allowing in our country. This is the reality of what we're allowing in our world. And I think one of the interesting ways to do it is to use a different sense. Why don't we listen to the Holocaust that we've allowed to take place? You say, well, how do you do that? Well, one of the things that you can do is this. Well, you're about to hear the sounds of metal BBs that'll hit the side of a tin can. And for every BB that strikes, it represents 10,000 lives lost in the wars of America's past. 10,000 lives for every single BB that you hear. The American Revolution. The Civil War. World War I. World War II. The Korean conflict. The conflict in Vietnam. September 11th and the War on Terror. Since 1973, the War on the Unborn Child. This is the reality of what is occurring in your country. God help us.
I think when people look at me, they would never guess in a million years that I am who I am. That people like Margaret Sanger and other people who believe in eugenics made the decision and continue to believe that someone like me should not exist in this world simply because maybe I was unplanned or unwanted in their eyes. Because 35 years ago, my biological mother had an abortion when she was pregnant with me. My biological mother was not married to my father. I wasn't planned. People can say I was a mistake, but she had an abortion, and that abortion was meant to end my life. I was meant to be scalded to death while I was still in the womb through a saline infusion abortion. And I soaked in the toxic salt solution that was meant to end my life for 5 days. When my mother went back to the hospital on the 5th day of the abortion procedure, her labor was induced with me, and I was delivered, and I was meant to be dead. From what I've been told by medical professionals, they initially believed that the abortion had succeeded in ending my life, and they left me for dead. You know, we know that I would have just been disposed of later like the trash. But instead, there was a nurse tending to my biological mother, heard the weak grunting noises coming from my body, and stepped in and provided me with the medical care that sustained my life.
One of the most mind-boggling things to me about the 1973 decision in Roe versus Wade, you have the oral argumentation that happens between Justice Potter Stewart and Sarah Weddington, one of the attorneys that was arguing on behalf of Roe, Jane Roe. Potter Stewart basically puts Weddington in the corner and says, listen, if what is conceived in the womb, if we knew that that was a human being, you would have a very difficult case here. And Weddington said, yes, I would have a very difficult case. And Stewart follows up and says, because if that was a human being, what you are arguing would be the equivalent of saying that after the child is born, if it becomes a burden on the mother can have it exterminated because it's a human life. And Sarah Weddington, arguing for Roe, and this is right there in the oral argument, says, yes, that is correct.
When people talk about abortion, when they push the issue of eugenics and talk about people like me being weeds that need to be cultivated, what they're not thinking about is that I am someone's child. I'm someone's sister. I'm someone's mother. I'm someone's wife. And so many people seem to think that it couldn't be them. It's easy to say that someone else should be cultivated, someone else should be exterminated, when in fact it very well could be them too.
People don't think about that. By the time you think about it, it's too late. It's a worldview. People need to decide, what do I believe about human life? Do I believe that we're all equal, that every life is equal? Now, most people say, no, I don't. Well, then you need to think that through. Why don't you, and where does that thinking lead? Where has it led historically?
For people to point the finger at someone else and say, you are not worthy of living, based on whose standard? Based on whose judgment? It's a very subjective thing.
They're leading to the deaths of millions of innocent children in God's creations, and not just children, but grown adults as well.
You know, stand before my daughter and my husband and tell them that what happened to me is perfectly okay. Tell my family how it has made our lives better. That is the challenge that I have to the individuals who are pro-eugenics and pro-abortion.
A lot of people think, well, we'll get it right this time. They always think they'll get it right, and we have not got it right. In fact, you know, when we get it wrong, it goes so dramatically wrong that we should all be running and screaming from it. But we keep flirting with these ideas. We're flirting with them now in a number of different ways in our culture, and people need to understand the ramifications of these ideas.
Every life is created in God's image. Whether people agree with me on the issue of faith or not, the truth is science also clearly points to what we know the Bible has told us, that from the moment of conception, that is a distinct life. That is a life with a set of DNA that has never existed before and will never exist again.
There's something precious about human life that is always worth protecting at every stage. That is what once separated the United States and Western civilization from every other philosophy in the world. And that is what should still separate us.
What we need to do is understand that this little experiment in the universe is very special. We want to make sure this legacy carries on to future generations. We want to make sure that those unborn not just our species, but other creatures, they have their time here. So they can experience the beauty of what this journey is for them.
We are eternal creatures. We have souls. We will never die. That makes our value seem huge, is putting it mildly, infinite, right? Infinite. If we're created in the image of God, our value is infinite. If we're not, if we just evolved out of the primordial soup by accident, and however we got here was just an accident, and life has no meaning, then clearly our lives have no meaning and no value. I mean, what is value? You can't even talk about value or meaning at that point if it's all by accident.
The one thing I know, I get up every day, life. This is life. I don't know what it is, but I want to grasp it. I want to optimize it. I want to have the full extent of my one and only little journey here.
Some of the folks that are watching, they may have the ability to only influence family members or their neighbor right across the road from them. The truth is, their neighbor will never watch a video like this, but they will come over and sit down and drink a glass of sweet tea with you and be able to sit there and have a conversation. And that gives you an opportunity.
I believe we're up to the challenge because I see people doing it around me, and you do and others do all the time. They begin to make a shift and they change the way they think, they change the way they live, and they're better for it.
We don't need to stifle one side of the conversation in the hopes that it allows the other side of the conversation to thrive. What we do need to do is have the conversation. And by having it, I truly believe that that is going to make a big difference.
The only thing that I can suggest is go to the museums, go to do some research, not just online, go to an actual library, do some real research, learn what happened in your community, learn what happened with those people who maybe the families forgot.
We need people to pay attention. We all need to educate ourselves and re-educate ourselves. The ideas around us are changing, technology is changing, and design is providing a means for people to question.
You know, we have to be willing to question the status quo. You know, we can even look at Nazi Germany and see what happened when people didn't question the status quo. Are we going to be willing to question it for our lives and for the sake of those around us?
The Nazis said, Germany, we worship Germany. When push comes to shove, we worship Germany. We want Germany to win. Whatever it takes, we'll do that. But I would say there's a similar odd situation now where people have somehow placed the planet over and above people. And so that's the question. Which do you choose, right? If I knew that I can kill that person and it'll help the planet a little bit or something, that's the utilitarian view, and that says killing is okay. If I need to kill for the greater good. And in a way, you can see how that orthodoxy will force people to choose against the idea that everyone has intrinsic value and say, for the greater good, we have to kill some people. And that is a chilling thing. So ultimately, people are going to need to decide what they believe.
Is every person created by God with intrinsic value? Should they be protected regardless of their ability or viability? Or are some people flowers while others are weeds struggling to survive on limited resources? Are we justified in cultivating the garden in order that some might thrive or even survive? These questions are not easy to answer, nor are they insignificant. How we answer them ultimately determines what happens to those whom some consider to be nothing more than human weeds, and what happens when it's determined that we are the weeds.
If you've never changed your mind about something, pinch yourself. You may be dead.
The head of the Nazis' so-called T4 euthanasia program was a doctor named Karl Brandt. And it's weird because in the Bonhoeffer book, Bonhoeffer is corresponding with a friend of his. I can't remember who it is exactly now. I think it's Erwin Sutz, who is another theologian. But he had gone hiking on some expedition with Brandt, and they're sort of talking about him. And what is so amazing, this gets to sort of, Hannah Arendt's idea of the banality of evil. Some of these people, they weren't monsters by any means. In fact, to go farther than that, they firmly believed they were doing good. And we need to understand that. Even though they were doing something which I would say was chilling and horrific and monstrous, they really believed they were doing good. They thought they were doing good for humanity. And they reasoned it out based on their worldview. And you have to give them that they had a consistent worldview, and that worldview says, all human life is not equal. We must do what we can. Here's what we can do. The thing is, what we have to deal with is understanding that worldview led, I would say, inevitably to the death camps and to the crematoria. That's where that worldview leads. It must. It must. People say, no, it mustn't. It must. It will. It has. That worldview says that we can kill. The state has the right to kill, to murder. And that's exactly what these men were doing. In fact, there's another doctor I mentioned at the end of the Bonhoeffer book who was involved in creating the crematoria, the gas chambers and the crematoria. He was someone that Bonhoeffer met, and this man firmly believed he was doing good by humanely killing the Jews. He really believed that this was humane somehow. So it's always kind of wrapped up in scientific terminology, medical terminology. It's social engineering of the grimmest kind, but it always is wrapped up in a way that prevents these people from looking like monsters and from us as seeing them as monsters if we get to know them. But in fact, of course, they are monsters, especially to the people they're murdering.